So if you have lived and breathed this case for the last 6 months like I have, if you actually know what to look for, there is some juicy stuff in these filings. It's pretty obvious from the get-go that the Bondi DOJ did not expect the judge to actually release the grand jury transcripts from the New York Epstein case. But one of the first things that I really focused in on was the transcript for the bail hearings for Epstein. So they started off a bail hearing with another judge, but then they had a continuance so that the lawyers could gather some information and respond to some requests by the government. And so 3 days later, they continued the bail hearing, which is how Judge Richard Berman got the case. But in that bail hearing, in a 3-day period, Epstein only filed with the court a 1-page self-disclosure of his financial assets. Didn't include bank accounts, didn't include all of his property, and in fact didn't even name the banks that he had accounts with. But it's pretty obvious that it was a bad idea to continue that bail hearing, at least for the defense, because the prosecutor, Ross Miller, informed the court, in connection with that factor, Your Honor, just this morning, the government became aware that a locked safe in the defendant's mansion, there were piles of cash, dozens of diamonds, and a passport appearing to be issued from a foreign country with the photo of the defendant and a name on the passport that is not the defendant's name. Judge says, "Say that again. You found that today?" We became aware of it today. It was seized in connection with a warrant. We became aware of it just this morning. The judge responds with, "When you say piles of cash, did you count it?" I always love a flabbergasted judge. The prosecution goes on to say, "I should say, Your Honor, I forgot to mention the passport that I just referenced listed at the time his residence as Saudi Arabia. This was from the 1980s. The judge again goes, "Would you describe that passport again? I'm not sure I caught it." "I can, Your Honor. The passport was issued in the name of a foreign country. It appears to have been issued sometime in the 1980s. It is currently expired. It has photo that appears to be the defendant, and it has a name that is not Epstein." I'm going to skip ahead in time just so I can keep this all clustered together. But this is from Jeffrey Berman, the United States attorney who's in charge of the case, not to be confused with Richard Berman, the judge in this case. So sorry about that confusion. I can't help what their names are. Weirdly enough, this letter is a response to something that the defendant's lawyers presented to the judge, and yet I couldn't find that letter anywhere in these documents. Y'all will come to find out that that is a pattern going forward with a lot of these transcripts. We at least have an idea of what that letter says because they reference it. So they quote the Epstein lawyer's letter as saying the Austrian passport expired 32 years ago. The government has nothing to suggest and no evidence that Epstein ever used it. But Jeffrey Berman flat out refutes that and says there's literally stamps from France, Spain, United Kingdom, and Saudi Arabia on this passport. The government further notes that the defendant's submission does not address how the defendant obtained the foreign passport, and more concerning, the defendant has still not disclosed to the court whether he is a citizen or legal permanent resident of a country other than the United States. And the explanation that Epstein's lawyers give is that Epstein was given the passport at issue by a friend. Some Jewish Americans were informally advised at the time to carry identification bearing a non-Jewish name when traveling internationally in case of hijacking. What? He never used the documents to travel internationally and never presented it to any immigration or customs authority, and claimed that the stamps were already there when they printed his information on the passport. Also weird is that they say that Epstein reported in his pretrial services that he is a lifelong American citizen and has no other citizenship or legal permanent residency. So it seems pretty obvious to me that Jeffrey Berman thought that that was not true. And now we're going to dive into my bread and butter, subtext. Because the government talks about rejecting the idea of the defendant's proposal for private security. Because Epstein said that if his bail was denied, he wanted to hire his own private security guards to keep him safe in jail. That's not a person who's trying to end their own life. That's a person who's desperately trying to stay alive. Not only that, but I figured out how they incapacitated Epstein the night he left this earth. But that's going to be its own video, so make sure you interact with this one so it'll pop up when I post it.